Welcome back to Canada's Court. The NBA season is underway, but it's not been a pretty one for the Toronto Raptors and their fans. The Raptors are 2-10, but there have been some bright spots. One of those bright spots, to me at least, is that Coach O is back on the podcast here to talk about the Toronto Raptors. Coach O, as you know, is the host of the Project 365 podcast and a coach at Royal Crown here in Toronto. Coach O, how are you doing tonight?
Phil, again, always a pleasure to be on Canada's Court. It's been a little while, so looking forward to talking some hoops with you.
Yeah, it's been too long. It's been too long. So I'm glad we're back and doing this. I think the last time we did a Raptors Focus podcast was after all their offseason moves. So now we're kind of coming to the other end of it and seeing it actually play out. I feel like I'm going to take a little bit of heat in this podcast. Not from you, because you're always very, very kind, but I'm worried that online people are going to take a look at this podcast and take a look at that 2-10 record and say, why is Phil talking about all these positive things? We're 2-10, but I can't change who I am. It's what it is. But it is interesting to note this time last year, the Raptors were 7-5. So a big difference, but as I mentioned, there are some bright spots, and I think the number one name, whenever I talk to people these days about the Raptors, the first thing they mention is Grady Dick. What have you been seeing from Grady Dick that's kind of standing out to you so far?
It's very eye-opening, and I love that you started with Grady Dick first. It's very eye-opening, just for us to be able to see the efficiency to which that he is scoring this early in the season. I think what's most interesting, Phil, is that he's not breaking too much the pattern of the offense, and he's finishing plays, which I always found was very interesting. Because we know a lot of times players that come from big time programs, like his situation, players that come from Kansas, are really good at playing within an offense, really good at being guys that cut, move off the ball really well, rebound, push the ball, run in transition, that kind of stuff, right? But what he's showing to us is that there's another level to his game where he is efficient with his scoring, and he's very dynamic with it. And that's been very interesting to watch. Right now for the 2024-2025 season, Grady Dick is averaging 20 points a game, 2 assists, and 3 rebounds. And again, we talked about it before. I don't think if we started at the beginning of the year and people told us that Grady Dick would be averaging 20, I don't know if a lot of us would have been on board to be with that. But it's very interesting. It's very surprising. And I think what's very encouraging for the Raptors is that we talk about a team that is really big on developing players. Well, the plan works because last year spent a lot of time in the G League, right? But for him to just be able to come in and seamlessly, in a way, numbers-wise, contribute to the team's offense is something that's very, very encouraging for the whole organization and definitely for the player development staff.
Well, it's interesting. I know we're going to get more into some of the other players as we go, but you brought up the development staff, and it's interesting because last season I saw a lot of people who were kind of down on that, who were like, what happened? We were so good at developing players, and now we've got people walking out the door. Fred left for nothing. Like we don't have anybody coming back up. And at the end of the day, it was kind of just a symptom of, not a symptom, but a factor of winning a championship, right? They had to go so all in to win that championship, as you do 10 out of 10 times, but they just didn't have that same youth pipeline, which now we talked about it in the offseason has just been completely rejuvenated. You see all sorts of young players, and now, interestingly enough, getting a lot of minutes. But you also take a look, you talk about that development where Grady Dick was last season at this time. People were throwing out the word bust. They were saying, "Oh, his shot's broken. He can't hit anything. He doesn't have any confidence," and he was struggling. But it just goes to show you that maybe we don't, just like we don't want to judge, assume Grady Dick's going to average 20 points for the whole season. We're also not going to assume that because someone comes in and struggles for their first little bit, that's the end of it. Because right now, Grady Dick is looking not just like a good second year player, but he looks like he should be starting in the NBA. Like it's no fluke that he's there. And just I think, and maybe you can tell me a little bit more about this, but he's going to look even better, perhaps score less, but he's going to look even better when you have a healthy Scottie Barnes and a healthy Emmanuel quickly next to him.
Yeah, we talked about this. We have two of the core rotational pieces of the Raptors that are missing as of right now, right? Um, Scottie Barnes, obviously dealing with that orbital bone fracture, right? And Emmanuel Quigley dealing with a lower body injury. I think you're looking at what potentially that may be able to do, and I'm gonna throw my word again out here, Phil. I'm a big fit guy, and I think having someone like Scotty who likes to play make, having somebody as like Emmanuel Quigley who is off the bounce kind of scorer, but then having somebody that could come in and just be able to provide some kind of consistent scoring, consistent threat, off ball, whip movement, being a really good, again, movement shooter, but someone that's also able to, when those guys go to the bench or miss certain games, is able to carry the load. I think that's a very, very, very encouraging thing. And like we said, right now, obviously, Raptors, Raptors fan, close your ears for this one. But you're at 2-10 right now, if I'm not mistaken, at the time of this recording. Correct?
Yep.
2-10. Yeah. So you're last in the Eastern Conference, and I'm not mistaken, that may be last overall as of right now.
Last overall
Last
as
over.
of recording on Wednesday night.
Right, right, right. So, big part about what's happening right now is that we have, obviously you're decimated with injury, but you're playing these young guys, and the hardest thing to get young guys to understand and young guys to buy into is definitely defense and making those winning plays at the end of the game. I think that's going to be growing pains for a little bit. We talked about it. There was a stretch. There was a stretch of game where the Raptors ending up losing, but they won one close game and then ended up losing. I think three very, very, very close games.
Mm-hmm.
And let me just pull this up right now. Yep, you lose to the Denver Nuggets by 2 on November 4th. November 6th, you lose by 5 to the Sacramento Kings. You lose by 2 to the LA Clippers, as a back-to-back the day after. On November 9th. And then on November 10th, right after, you're playing against the Lakers. And we know how hard back-to-backs are.
Mm-hmm.
That game, you get blown out. And just last night, obviously, the final score is a bit closer, but Milwaukee dominated that game from start to finish, right?
Yeah.
So you start to wonder that having a couple players in there that maybe have a bit more experience, right? Maybe that takes you over the hump to win a couple of those games, right? And maybe you're not looking at a 2-10 record. So very easily 2-10 could have been 7-5, Phil.
Yeah, and we mentioned the big injuries, obviously, but it's not just that. Like Jacoby Walter is out, Bruce Brown's been out the entire season so far. R.J. Barrett didn't play the first few games. Kelly Olynyk has yet to play, and he's obviously a key veteran presence. So here you're having a lot of guys have to step up and really play some significant minutes. One player, I just to get back to Grady Dick, just to kind of tie a bow on that. The only question I'm seeing from people, like people are confident in his scoring now. They love his shooting. They're like, okay, this is what we signed up for. I think the big question mark now is defense, right? Is he going to be able to be good enough on defense? He doesn't have to be Klay Thompson. He doesn't have to be Kawhi Leonard, but he's got to be able to stay on the floor. What have you seen on that end? Do you feel like he's got the tools where that he can at least get to that point where he's maybe not a good one-on-one defender, but at least a good team defender?
Well, yeah. So again, going back to the strength of him being at Kansas to a team that provides that kind of solid foundation, right? I think in terms of understanding defensive schemes and just positioning and that kind of stuff, I tend to find that he's a lot of times he is in the right positions, but we know that when you how to say, like, a lot of times when you have to give a lot on one side of the ball, the other side kind of suffers a little bit, right? So with him having to maybe get so much of a defensive an offensive load, the defensive side right now is not being showcased at the level that it should be, right? So my hope is that when the Raptors get all their players back, he's able to kind of like be able to be kind of like that two-way player that he's able to be, because that bleeds right into players like RJ, players like Davion Mitchell, right? Players that are able to make good decisions on the offensive end, but like have some intensity on defense, right? So if you're looking at just the DNA makeup of this team, I think you have a lot of complementary pieces, not only offensively, but I think defensively. And that is what's very important, like just being able to have people that complement each other's strength on the offense, be able to complement each other defensively. So I think definitely, he's still young, right?
Mm.
Second year in the league. I think it's very early to kind of like cast stones and be like, yo, he's bad defender, you know what I mean? But I think
Totally.
like, I think we also have to understand situation too, right? So
You mentioned another name there that I was hoping we could talk about, which was Davion Mitchell. Obviously, came over in that trade with Sacramento. The Raptors basically got him for nothing, and has played an important role so far this season. I mean, that's in large part due to the fact that Emmanuel Quickly's been injured, but he's been looking strong, like you said, a strong defender, but has distributed the ball well, has stepped up and hit shots. That's been looking like a great addition for the Raptors.
oh yeah, for sure. And I think like we talked about it a bit before. That was one of the players that I put on my watch list. I wanted to see how he was going to fit in with this culture. I wanted to see how he was going to fit in just in terms of personality. And I think right now he's fitting like he's provided that spark that I think we really needed, right? A really good point of attack defender, right? So for the listeners, a point of attack defender is when you have the primary ball handler coming down with the ball. Think LeBron James coming down as a point guard. You think who else? Damian Lillard. Guys like that. Stephen Curry, right? A point of attack defender is somebody that is able to, before the action even happens, is able to put that pressure on the primary person initiating the offense, right? I like his screen navigation, right? Just him being able to move around screens, right? So that's important too. But I think what I'm really happy about is the catch and shoot threes. Just him being able to take those and be very confident with them. You're seeing a couple of games where he's made 2 out of 3 versus the Sacramento Kings in that stretch that we were talking about versus the Denver Nuggets, right? 2 for 7, right? It's not shying away from those threes. But I think like that's important because you're building towards when you have your whole team back, right? And when you're gonna play around Scottie, you're gonna play around RJ, right? You're gonna have to be willing to take those catch and shoot threes, right? You're gonna have to play defense. In a lot of situations, you may have to guard. You may have to guard up, right? That means that maybe guarding somebody that is maybe bigger than you, is more physical, right? But you're gonna have to find a way to stay on the floor by making open shots. And I think like that's what he has shown. So he has shown that he's able to handle the offense, right? But he has shown that he's able to play, off closeouts, which I find is very important in today's basketball.
You're a guy. When I think about your podcast and the work you do and the coaching you do, you focus a lot on development. You talk a lot about improvement
Mm-hmm.
and roles and all that stuff. When you look at how this season has started for the Raptors, obviously you never want to be without your 2 of your best players to start the
Mm-hmm.
season. But what are the kind of benefits of having some time where you get to put some guys into the rotation who maybe otherwise wouldn't have or would have had smaller roles? What kind of benefits can you take away from that going forward?
Well, playing is the best experience. Playing is the best. What's the saying? Experience is the best teacher.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I butchered that.
You
But
got it. You got it.
but I think getting this opportunity to play them this early in the season, I think it kind of gets you going, right? I think it's in a way it's almost like a blessing in disguise for the coaching staff because early you're able to see what you have with I guess a bit less pressure. It's still pressure because you have to win games, but it's a bit less pressure because it's so early, right? So in the back of your mind, you believe that you have time. Um, and also, it's interesting because we're heading into this era now where we have this NBA Cup, right? We have the in-season tournament, and for them to be able to play "quote unquote" meaningful basketball, that accelerates the development of your players because you're playing games where the possessions are even more meaningful, right? So you're playing for something, and I think like this is something that the coaching staff cannot take lightly. I think it's almost like you got to evaluate the players almost like every game is almost in silo, right? Like the season is one thing, and then you have the in-season game. You got to see who you can rely on, but you're almost looking maybe towards the end of the year. You're looking towards maybe 2 years from now, where hey, maybe we are in the in-season tournament. Maybe we are in the play-in tournament. Sorry, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a lot of value early in the season to be able to get players in, this quickly and being able to get thorough evaluation. There's nothing that is the equivalent of playing games. That's the only way that players get better.
And especially for someone like Davion Mitchell, who you would assume is going to be a part of the rotation no matter what. Obviously, I think a smaller role when everyone's healthy, but still a player they're going to look to. Um, they're going to look even better, next to those guys that we've talked about, Scottie and Quickly, but B, going up against second units instead of against starters, right? Like that's
Right.
certainly a factor. Has there been anybody else so far from this kind of 12 games? Obviously, it's early, but of the kind of new players to the Raptors, has there been anybody else that stood out to you as you're like, okay, I'm glad I got to see a little bit of this.
Hmm. Um, I think it's a bit all over the place.
Hmm.
I talked to you beforehand. I told you that I liked obviously, maybe not new player, but I like Chris Boucher's
Mm-hmm.
efficiency. I like his contribution to the team, right? Him being able to score in double digits, like on different kind of nights, I think is valuable. Obviously, him being able to block shots as well, right? I think that's something that is of value. Um, but again, going back to what we were talking about, um, not a new player, but Abaji as a
Mm.
second year player, right? Them Kansas boys are doing their thing, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Um, what's interesting with him is just that he's asked to, in the absence of a lot of these key players, he's asked on sometimes play 30 minutes a game, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which I find like is very interesting because it's like that in a way kind of shows us that like the Raptors know what kind of players that they need to be able to fit that kind of like playing style that they want. Somebody that could defend, somebody that could attack close on, somebody that could make open shots, right? On a lot of times him and Davion are asked to guard I would say the two best matchups, right? So I think like that's interesting for them to be able to get that from their young players, right? Obviously Davion Mitchell not as young, right?
Mm-hmm.
But him coming into a new situation after having been um, in Sacramento and having played behind crowded backcourts, right? For him to get that kind of opportunity. In a weird way, he's kind of like in the same situation as Abaji, where they're both
Mm-hmm.
getting this new opportunity, right? So I think like that's something definitely to look out for sure.
Yeah, Ochai has been a really interesting one because at points last season, there was times you're like, okay, I can kind of see something happening there, but he's really looked like almost a completely different player in a way. Like he's got a lot more confidence. He's shooting the ball with a lot more confidence. He's defending well. Um, to have that is I think not enough people are recognizing that. I think that's pretty serious addition, and he's another one of those guys where when people come back and people are healthy and games are a little bit closer, he's a guy who's going to factor in. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's been fun to watch guys like Jamal Shed and Jonathan Mobo, but at the end of the day, it's guys like Chris Boucher and Davion Mitchell and Ochai Abaji who are going to play big minutes down the stretch here when everybody's healthy, and they've impressed. I'm like that's why I said at the beginning of the podcast, when I go through the roster and I look at the guys and I think about how they've played, I'm mostly pretty happy. There isn't anybody who I'm like, oh wow, they're really underperforming, or they should be doing this or they should be doing that. They're doing what I would hope they would do, if not better. And so yeah, it's 2-10. It's bad. But the pieces, the puzzle pieces are there. I feel that they just need to click them together. And the fact that they're missing a couple pieces is certainly, it's hard to finish a puzzle when you're without a couple of your pieces. I know that much from experience.
Yeah, the key pieces. I think like I mean, we talked about it. Like, those were our two guys coming into the season where we said, okay, we're gonna base this team. It's gonna be around, it's gonna be around RJ. It's gonna be around Scottie. It's gonna be around Quigley, right? And we're missing all three of them.
Yeah,
So,
not how you want to start. But let's talk about that third player you mentioned, RJ Barrett. We haven't really hit on him. We had our huge full podcast all about RJ Barrett when he came over. We've been probably the captains of the RJ Barrett fan club here in the Canadian basketball podcast landscape. He's been scoring well. He had a couple tough games recently, but still scoring well. What's been really interesting to me is passing very well. And I think back to our first conversation about him, and you mentioned that was a place you hope to see him develop. That's shown. And he's not going to have to do that, all the time for the Raptors when those guys are back. But the fact that he's showing he can do that, and maybe he just does it on a bit of a smaller scale for a few minutes here or there with those other guys on the bench in the future. Like that's encouraging. How have you felt about RJ Barrett so far?
When we talked about it during the Olympics, right? The biggest question we had was he going to be able to use the momentum that he was getting from the Olympics to be able to carry that into his season? That was our biggest thing. What ends up happening, basketball is a very interesting sport, Phil, where it's like the more aggressive you are, the more it opens up passing opportunities for your teammates, right? What we're seeing is just that we're seeing more of a decisive RJ, which is what I feel asked for in January, if I'm not mistaken.
I think so. Yeah.
So that'll be very interesting to see, because if you look at now, I mean, he's taking more threes. The 3-point numbers are up, right? He matched like he's making 2 a game, right? The percentage may be down, but him taking, obviously, is going to be such a high usage player for this team, right? So, and then you're looking at the assist numbers are up as well from last year, right? So this is someone that is now being asked to handle the offense in key moments, right? Got the chance to see him against the Lakers in person, and he just looked like he wanted all the smoke in that one, right? So for me, the way that I look at it is we're getting the player that we wanted to have when we traded, right? Where we're getting the guy that could attack closeout, the guy that could make catch and shoot threes. We're getting a high percentage finisher at the rim, and we're getting somebody that defensively gives us a lot of versatility, right? So I am very happy with the way that RJ has handled everything. And again, like, hopefully he comes back, makes a speedy recovery, and is able to continue on that same wavelength, because he's been very fun to watch this year.
One of the questions we kind of when he came over, when he was on the Raptors last year, he was playing well, but the free throw shooting dipped in a significant way. Yep. And then we noticed that again at the Olympics, and it's continued now. As someone who, like, you work with a lot of young people, you work on jump shots, you work on free throws. What do you make of this kind of uncharacteristic dip in free throw percentage? He's never been like a terrific free throw shooter, but he hasn't been this.
Right. Well, so when you're saying When you're saying the dip, you're talking about in the numbers, or you're
Yeah, like
talking
his
about in the
percentage.
mix
His percentage is kind of
percentage?
dropped. Just and it's weird because it was just on the Raptors. Like when he was on the Knicks, even that season, he was shooting them okay. But then he came here, and it just seemed to have dipped. Maybe it's just I don't know. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Free throws is very interesting because I think like it's almost like, certain people don't, there's almost like a science to it that I think is a lot of times like misunderstood. What ends up happening a lot of times is like when you're a high volume, high usage player, I don't know how to explain it. I'm gonna try to explain it the best way I can, but because you're in the game so much, when you're at the free throw line, you take that opportunity more to rest than to execute and finish, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
So I think what I found is very interesting with those is just like he kind of has to put himself in a mindset where like um, he's such a dynamic kind of player that his efficiency kind of drops because of fatigue, if that makes
Mm.
sense. You know, so a lot of times what ends up happening is just like you got to find a way to get easy ones, right? Where it's maybe you catch the ball a bit closer to the basket, you could take 1-2 dribbles, right? Maybe because if you look at a lot of RJ's drives are he's taking the ball away from the 3-point line, he's dribbling down, defender cuts him off, he'll do a counter move and then just go up and finish, right? Well,
Hmm.
that's a lot more energy. But what's going to end up happening is the longer RJ's in the league, the more he matures in that spin. He's going to get more efficient with how he generates those free throws, right? So a lot of times the way that you generate your free throws has a lot to do with it, right? And after that, it's just repetition, being able to get in there and just be able to find a routine for yourself, feel confident in that, right? So I hope I gave you a kind
No,
of an answer.
that's super
Yeah,
interesting. It kind of made me think
it's too late.
like on top of that, he's also being asked to play a lot more minutes. When you said fatigue, it kind of made me think like he's also being asked to play a lot more minutes,
Right.
and he has a
Mm-hmm.
bigger responsibility here in Toronto compared to when he was in New York, where he was just kind of
Mm-hmm.
another guy. So that
Mm-hmm.
that 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 is a really interesting point when you talk about the
Mm-hmm.
fatigue and getting to the rim, and hopefully they'll tick up and like. I have hope that it will. Obviously, again, we're
Yeah.
optimistic guys here, so here's to
Yeah,
hoping.
and this and he wants to be a two-way player, right?
Hmm.
So think about this, like the rest that some scorers are getting on the defensive end, he's not getting that on the defensive end, right? So he's playing. It's almost like he's in the same category as a Anthony Edwards and a Jimmy Butler kind of thing, right? Where it's like it's on both ends, right? You got to find a way of where you're gonna get that rest in the game. Where a lot of times it's sometimes it's based on substitution patterns, right?
Hmm.
Where it's like against certain matchups, maybe you could take your break. Sometimes you see a lot of superstars take their breaks towards the end. Towards the end of the quarter, right? Some superstars will come out like maybe with a minute, 2 minutes left in the quarter to have a longer break to be able to start off, right? So there's different ways that you got to work with that, but that's the beauty of our game, right? We have different sciences that we have to make when it comes to that. But you're looking at other players like Steph Curry, who runs all over the place, right?
Hmm.
With him, it's maybe just obviously being one of the greatest shooters of all time, right? With him, it's just about conditioning, right? He's at optimal shape all the time, right?
Hmm.
Maybe not asked to defend at the level that RJ is being asked, right? But every to each their own, and a lot of times you just got to figure out what works for you.
Yeah, totally. We've talked a lot about a lot of positives here. At the end of the day, it is 2-10. That's not great, and I'm going to bring up the old T word, tanking. The facts are, as of recording, the Raptors are the worst team in the NBA, as we talked about. Another fact is there's a lot of hype around a Duke freshman named Cooper Flagg. Coach O, how do you feel when you hear the word tanking about the Raptors? How does that make you feel?
I just think like the Raptors has never been an organization that has prided themselves on tanking. I think they
Hmm.
just always, you just ended up with a bad record. I don't think it's in the DNA of the organization, if that makes sense. I think it's
Yeah.
always about get better, right? So even if you start off bad, well, they're gonna try to rip off 4 wins in a row, Phil,
Yeah.
at some point. You know what I mean? So, um, but you're looking at, if ever. This is not a bad draft to get a high pick, because you're
Hmm.
looking at a lot of people are talking about Cooper Flag, but has the potential to have a very deep in terms of potential first round
Hmm.
picks, right? People are not really talking about the VJF comes, who's at Baylor. Ace Bailey's another one who's
Hmm.
gonna be really good, right? He's at Rutgers, right? So I mean, this is also like a deep draft, right? So it's not a bad thing if ever you end up having a top pick.
Yeah, and the
But
Raptors are.
but
Go ahead. Sorry.
yeah, sorry, but no, but Cooper Flag, obviously, being the projected as of right now number one pick, it's not a bad pick to have either, right? So
No, it's interesting because I agree with you. I think at the core of it, Masai Ujiri, that front office, they're not going to. Obviously, this is a rebuilding year. They know that they've said so.
mm,
That's what this is. But I agree with you. I don't think they're the type of team to purposefully lose.
yeah,
Sit guys just because. I don't think it's about that for them. I think
hmm
they're going to try and win all the games they can. I don't think they're going to go out and make moves to try and improve their record this season. But I think they're gonna prioritize development. They're gonna keep playing some of those young guys. I wouldn't be surprised if you see them move on from a guy like Bruce Brown, who maybe isn't part of their long term future. But yeah, I think you're right. I don't really see them blatantly tanking, but at the end of the day, they just might be bad enough that they. I mean, a 2-10 is a tough start, and that kind of they're at the top of the tanking rankings right now. So it'll be something to monitor for sure. It very well could be that in March we're paying extra close attention to college basketball, but we'll see what happens. And so this kind of brings me to my last question, the last kind of thing I wanted to talk to you about is we're about a week away from Scottie Barnes being reevaluated. Same with Emmanuel Quickly. By then, we'll if everything works out within a week or so, we'll have everybody back and healthy for the most part. What do you think this team looks like at that point? Is there room for them to be competitive and kind of claw back at this, or again, is it just going to come down to we're gonna try and win games, but we're not going to play Scottie Barnes 42 minutes. We're just gonna see how things play out.
yeah. So that's a tough one. You're asking me all the hard questions, man.
That's my
But that
job, man. That's my job.
yeah. But you know what? That'll probably be in my opinion, that'll probably be a decision that they'll make when it comes that time, right? Um,
I guess
at
I
two
guess
and
to be more
ten,
specific, my question is how competitive do you think this team can be if everybody's healthy?
competitive, definitely a lot of compete. I see a lot of compete with this group. Um, but to go back to your question, I think like at the time, they're gonna continue to compete and try to win games, right? I think that decision will come at the time when they get those pieces back, right? Because I mean, if you Phil, if you look at just the Eastern Conference right now, right? Obviously, the Raptors are 2-10, right? Worse in the league, but you've played the most games, right?
Mm-hmm.
You've played 12 games now. You've played. You're among the teams that have played the most. Philly is 2-8. Washington's 2-7. Milwaukee's 3-8 at the time of this recording. Chicago's 4-7. So it's just like the you're gonna like this one because I know you like good stats. You're gonna like this one.
Okay.
Um, the the team that's fourth right now in the Eastern Conference is 4-4.
Wow.
Has played 8 games, right? So 2 wins ahead, but just like has played 2 less games. So at the time of this recording, like yes, I agree. We're looking at you're at the bottom for sure, but you
Mm-hmm.
don't know where this could go. You win a couple of games here, other people lose a couple of games. It may be something else.
And I think it's interesting to note that they played tough teams. Like there's been a few
Mm-hmm.
a few bottom feeder teams there with Charlotte, but playing Denver twice, playing the Lakers twice, playing the Clippers.
Mm-hmm.
Even though
Back.
Milwaukee isn't good, like they're still
Mm-hmm.
a team
Yep.
that's not too long ago won a championship and is Giannis
Yep.
on their team.
Yep.
Like they
Yep.
haven't been
Back to
playing
back.
pushovers.
Think about that. Lakers,
Mm-hmm.
we went on that LA trip back to back. Think about that. Like, it hasn't been like that easy of a schedule, especially for a young group. I
Mm-hmm.
think that's what we need our fans to understand, right? So if anything, our fans are gonna thank us because we're giving hope. But I think, like there are a lot of factors. You're not trying to make excuses, but you got to understand the circumstances as well. You lose key pieces, and then you're going on road trips, and you're playing a bunch of back to backs, and you're playing against 3-time MVP. You're playing against greatest of all time, arguably, right? So it's just like, you know,
Yeah, I think
there's understandable reason.
it is. It is. I think there's reason to think that the Raptors aren't as bad as the record says. I don't think they're winning the championship this season. I think maybe probably at best they're a play-in team, especially given how things started. But I think it's not all doom and gloom. I'm not dooming and glooming here. I'm not putting bets on the Raptors winning it all, but I'm not crying into my pillow tonight.
Yeah, I agree. Same boat.
Lastly, just before we go, obviously, the last game the Raptors played was the first game of the NBA Cup. Just first of all, this is our second year into it. How do you feel? How are you feeling year 2 into the NBA Cup? How's it? Is it working for you, or is it just it's another game and let's keep going?
So me personally, I love it. I like meaningful basketball this early,
Mm-hmm.
right? Again, like I mentioned before, I think from a Raptors standpoint, I think that gives us the opportunity to um, look at our talent and evaluate it, a bit more quickly than we would have had the opportunity to do, right? Because you're playing for something, like I mentioned before. I like it. Obviously this early, like I think this is something that's very interesting. So, I'm all for it, Phil.
I'm not. I'm probably not the first person to say this. I love it. Same reasons as you. I like that it's some meaningful games, and you do see the players kind of. There is that extra intensity. I don't like the courts. I'm not.
I knew you were gonna. I
You
knew
knew
you were
it.
gonna say that.
It's just not aesthetically pleasing. I think there's a way they could do it that's cool, but the whole, it just doesn't work for me.
Yeah, a lot of you're not the first person that has told me that, but I think what they're trying to do is they're trying to kind of like
Mm-hmm.
you change the color of the court, you change the environment that
Yeah.
the fans get, you change the environment that the players feel once they get out there, right? It doesn't feel like a regular game, and I think that's what they were trying to go for.
Yeah, I'm not gonna besmirch whoever designed them, but I just think they could have maybe invested a few more dollars into it. That's all. That just a little bit more time, maybe different color. The problem is, and I have this problem with the Raptors jerseys too, and I love the Raptors throwback jerseys. First of all, I gotta get me one as soon as possible. But the problem is they'll wear those great purple jerseys, but then they'll play on the red and black court, and it just clashes. Like it's like your jersey should
Mm.
go with your if they and how amazing would it be if they threw like an old kind of retro Raptors floor down there for when those games when they had the purple. That's all I'm saying. I'm just saying it kind of clashes, and
Hmm.
we've probably talked too much about that on this podcast, but you know, I just had to say my piece. So okay, we'll really wrap things up here. Just quickly before we go, who are you watching for the potential NBA Cup winner this year? Who is your early, very early favorite?
Very early, we got to give credit. We got to give credit where credit is due right now. I'm going with the team of the moment right now.
Mm-hmm.
At the time of this recording, Cleveland Cavaliers are 13-0, so it's not a bad team to watch. I love what Kenny Atkinson has done with the team. Has really come in and created an identity for them, right? You just being able to play two bigs, at all times, and being able to, I'm seeing them run Evan Mobley off some pick and roll sometimes, right? A very, very, very fun team to watch for sure. Um, I would definitely go with Cleveland. And if I was to pick another team, I would definitely pick the Memphis Grizzlies. Um, we were talking about it way back. Phil, you were onto something. Zach Edey being able to come in and provide that kind of minutes as a rookie. I know a lot of people gave you some heat, but you were onto something for sure.
Look, he's been productive. He's looked good, and if he can come in and win be part of the team that wins the NBA Cup, I think we might have to revisit my draft at the end of the season. It might not look so bad after all.
No, absolutely. And I think for me, they have two rookies that are coming in producing for them. Obviously Jalen Wells coming in and starting. I think that's a lot of value to the team, right? So definitely a team that I would look out for. I would go with my dark horse to be able to make a deep run in this NBA Cup.
Yeah, if they win the NBA Cup, and then especially if Zach Edey wins Rookie of the Year, I'm gonna be requesting personal apologies from. Actually, I don't think that many people really gave me that much. Yeah, I think it was like one person. But either way, I'd like them to admit that maybe I'm not a complete moron. But
As you
Coach O, it's been great to have you on the podcast. Always fun to chat hoops with you. We'll have to do this again soon for sure.
We have to. Now season's just getting rolling. The fans are into it. Always a pleasure to be on Canada's Court. Looking forward to the next time.